Hello.
Hello, Ariel. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Welcome to class.
Thank you for having me.
Hello. We are so happy to have you. It's been what a semester, to
I
say
can
the
imagine.
least. And but we are so thankful to have you here because we are fortunate that we're there. You go. You're yes, we have you. Uh, that we are a class that follows writing and fighting. We follow media coverage of combat sports, and we are so glad that we could connect virtually post being sequestered in quarantine, because what an unbelievable series of weeks. Now I'm going to introduce you, Ariel, and then I'm going to catch you up to speed about our class and what we've
Okay.
been discussing. But Ariel is a graduate of Syracuse University's School of Public Communications. He's covered MMA professionally since 2006. He has worked for MMA Fighting, Fox Sports, and since joining ESPN in 2018, he hosts a number of shows: Ariel and the Bad Guy with Chael Sonnen, DC and Helwani with Daniel Cormier, and the Ariel Helwani MMA show, while regularly reporting on the UFC for all ESPN platforms. While also a father to three, Ariel is also the current vice president of the Mixed Martial Arts Journalists Association. So, you got a lot on your to deal with, and we have three kids probably right next in the next room, correct?
Yeah, right now they actually went out for a walk. But yes, it has been fun. They are aged 7, 6, and 3. So it
Wow.
is uh, it is chaotic, but it's been fun getting to bond with them in the midst of covering all this madness.
All the madness. Yes. Well, yeah, we do have that we've been closer to our family. Uh, but just to give you up to speed about American, our first class was January 14th, and I always start my class saying that, we're going to go back, we're going to look at old fights and review the writing of like AJ Liebling and Norman Mailer, and we're going to see the rhetoric maneuvers that they use and why that writing is successful. And I also tell them about how I'm excited about certain fights that are going on in the semester, including we had Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder to look forward to and watch the coverage. And that was February 22nd. And then I was so excited about UFC 249 with Khabib Nurmagomedov, the champion lightweight, versus Tony Ferguson. The fifth time this fight had, supposedly been put together. And Professor Kidder was saying that we get to watch this go on. We get to see the promotion. And wow, who knew that it would take so many turns? With American, we were told to go online the first week in March, I believe it was March 10th. Then March 11th, the NBA and almost every sports league shut down, which was a really turning point, I think, in society, because then we knew the seriousness of what was going on. Uh, we started back March 20th virtually, but on that day, March 11th, when the NBA shut down, there were there were only 47 cases in New York City and 190 in New York. And I just looked it up. In New York right now, April 10th, there are in New York 159,000 cases and 7,000 deaths. So that tells you, gives you an aspect of what's going on as we've been doing this class, what's happened with this COVID, and then how sports has been involved. We also had the postponement of the Olympics, unprecedented. And so now, this week, we thought we still had the UFC 249. And I think there's so much that happened in between. We can't even go into that. That would take up the whole class. But it was supposedly going to happen on a Native American tribal land, and it was canceled yesterday. And it's reported that possibly the California state officials intervened by expressing their concerns to the parent company Disney, with also a company with ESPN. Ariel, can you tell us what is going on and how are you feeling?
Well, first of all, can I just say, when I was a student at Syracuse University back in 2001 to 2004, I wish there was a class like this. I was telling my wife earlier today that I was doing this, and she was like, "What? That is the great, I mean, that would be your dream class, right?" And so I hope that all of you students who are joining us here and who take this class are appreciative of what your professor is doing for you, and that you could do a class like this, because I find the fight game to be very fascinating. Clearly, I've devoted my adult life to covering it, and the journalism surrounding it, not only in MMA, but as you said, in boxing, for many years, many decades, has been tremendous. There's been so many great things written and so many incredible events and characters, moments, that this is just a really great idea. So it is my honor to be here, and I really appreciate the invite. I've seen you have a lot of my other colleagues on before, but you never invited me, and I've been wondering what's been taking so long, if I'm being honest. You didn't want the best in the game on with your students, or you just felt like you had to build up to it? I understand. No, I'm just kidding. I'm
Not true.
kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So yeah. So now that I've said that, because I do really mean it, it's been a very strange week. It's been a very confusing week. It's been conflicting at times, because there is a part of me that feels for the fighters. I know that if they don't fight, they don't get paid, and I understand that, and I sympathize with that. But truly, in the midst of all of this, if you just look around, if you look at what people are saying, what the health officials are telling us, what the government is saying, what officials from India to Brazil to Australia to Canada to the United States, if you just listen to what everyone has been saying, you would come to the conclusion that putting on a mixed martial arts event, regardless of where it is, tribal land, island, cruise ship, is not a good idea. And I feel like the sooner we all adhere to these rules and regulations, staying at home, social distancing, etc., the sooner we can get back to our normal lives. We all want to do things. We all want to make money. We all want to go out. We all want to go and be with our friends and family, etc. And so there was a part of me that felt like this was really selfish. This was really reckless. And I was not comfortable with the idea of this going on. Now, of course, my job is to report on it. I'm not going to boycott it, but I didn't think that it was a good idea, especially when you look at the rest of the sports world. These are multi-billion-dollar industries that are shutting down. Why does MMA feel like it is above it all? Why do they feel like they could find a loophole in the system and put on this event? And so, quite frankly, I felt like it went on too long. I felt like this should have been, called off long ago. But I'm glad that cooler heads prevailed, and that sanity prevailed, and that they ultimately came to the decision of canceling this event. I've been thinking a lot about a famous quote by a long-time NFL head coach. May he rest in peace. His name is Dennis Green, and several years ago, he was coaching the Arizona Cardinals in a Monday Night Football game against the Chicago Bears. And the Chicago Bears were the favorite, and they were one of the best teams in the NFL that particular season. And the Cardinals were not, but they came really close to beating the Cardinals. And there's a very famous post-game press conference where Dennis Green shows up and is yelling and is all worked up, and he says, "They were who we thought they were. We let them off the hook. We knew exactly who they were. You guys didn't, and we almost exposed them, but in the end, they beat us." And he's very, very upset. And he says that line multiple times. They were who we thought they were. And I keep thinking about that line, because over the last 2 decades, MMA has come a long way. But I feel like, unfortunately, this past week, MMA exposed that it is what we thought it was, and it's still not grown up. It still hasn't reached the level of the NBA and the NFL, Major League Baseball, where they can recognize that when things are going on, like things are going on, they need to shut down as well. And so I don't think this was a particularly great week for the sport, but in the end, I'm happy that, like I said, sanity prevailed.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that a lot of people were saying, well, this is what the UFC is. It is this renegade, and that's what made it is what it is. However, I think that what happened yesterday is to show that no, it is a mainstream sport, and it is something that is going to have to come and be accepted and follow guidelines. What do you say about that when people say, well, what was happening was the essence of the UFC?
Yeah, and that to me was disappointing, because back in 1997, UFC 12 was supposed to happen in Buffalo, New York, and 2 days before the event, the New York State Athletic Commission said, "We are not going to regulate this. We are banning mixed martial arts." And then the UFC said, "We're going to take this to Oregon." And then the Oregon State Athletic Commission said, "We are not going to allow this to happen." So then they took it to tiny Dothan, Alabama, 200 miles away from Birmingham, Alabama, and self-regulated. And I felt like we were going back to 1997. This sport, essentially in America, was born in 1993. November 12, 1993 was the date of UFC 1. And like I said, we have come a long way since 1993. Who would have thought in 2020, 26 and a half years later, the sport would be on ESPN. It's on every channel, not just the UFC on ESPN, but you have Bellator owned by Viacom, and you've got all these other organizations all over the place. You can't go a single weekend without multiple MMA events being broadcast all over the world. And this week, I felt like we were going back to that era when the sport was renegade, when the sport was running away from government regulation, because that was always the UFC's battle cry back in the 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008 era when they were really exploding. We run towards regulation. We don't run away from regulation. Well, what were they doing this past week and last week as well? They were running away from regulation. There is no regulation at Tachi in Lemoore, California, where they wanted to put on this event. And so the idea of putting on a mixed martial arts event when you have people dying, when you have hospitals clogged up, when you have doctors and resources, to the max, why would you want to have fights where people could get hurt and bring them to the hospital? I love MMA. I've devoted my adult life to covering MMA, but I also feel like we could survive without it for a couple months. We'll be okay. We can watch old fights. We could do other things. We could talk to people. It's okay. So this idea that the world needed entertainment, the world needed normalcy, no, I don't buy it. And unfortunately, to your point, we kind of, confirm people's beliefs about the sport, because I think for the last couple of years, the sport had grown up and people were starting to accept it and talk about it and cover it like the other sports. And then what I saw this past week was, oh, of course, the cage fighting guys would be the ones who would try to forge on. And to me, that was disheartening.
Got it. Well, what's going on from here on after this? We hear that Fight Island is still in the works. How is that going to be regulated?
Yeah, I think we're ways away from that happening. I think that was a little self promotion on Dana's part. I mean, he's a tremendous promoter and self promoter, and obviously that caught on and people enjoyed that. But if normalcy resumes and if there are fights that are able to happen in Las Vegas, in California, etc., I couldn't understand why they would want to go through the hoops that they would have to go through to put on an event of that magnitude on an island. I mean, that's just an incredible undertaking. So I wouldn't get too caught up on that. I know that he was still trying to, this is Dana's way. He's defiant and he doesn't like to take no for an answer. And he took this as a personal challenge. I'm going to show all of you that I can get this done. And so yesterday, it's almost like he couldn't come to terms with the fact that he didn't necessarily fail. I mean, everyone has to shut down. This is not necessarily an L on his record, but the way he was spinning it was, oh no, Fight Island's going to happen. We're going to be back up and running. We're going to be the first ones, all that stuff and more. Honestly, it felt a little bit like that. I don't know if any of you have seen it. Perhaps you have, Professor, that closing scene in the Titanic when they're still playing the music as the ship is going down. It's like, guys, it's okay. Let the ship go down for now and we'll live to fight another day. But he's trying to play this music to get our minds off the fact that the ship was going down. And to me, it was just a little bizarre. So Fight Island, who knows? It's a fun thing to talk about. But once, normal times resume, they have an arena in Las Vegas that they can hold events very cheaply. I don't understand why they would want to go and do it on an island.
Yeah. Is there also something that Dana was trying to, or UFC was trying to capture an audience of viewers who are just desperate, or they think that we need something to root for. We have nothing to look forward to on the weekends. We have nothing after we're home at work. We don't even get to tune into a ball game. Was there something also about that there was this need that we will be the one to fill in?
I think that could be part of it. I think maybe they saw the attention that WrestleMania got last weekend and all the coverage that they got and thought like, wow, if we put on an actual live sporting event, we'll get some of that attention. But if you think it's just that, if you think it was just about that, then I think that's a naive approach. It was certainly about ego. It was certainly about being the ones who would be able to, keep the train rolling along and have a live sporting event and go through all this stuff and look what we did, look what we got done. But it was also about money as well. And if you know a little bit about the history of the UFC and the fact that they were sold in 2016 for 4.025 billion, no one showed up with a check for $4 billion. There was some financing involved and banks involved and whatnot, and they have bills to pay like we all do. And so that was a major part of it as well. And that's why they're saying these events aren't canceled. Canceled is wrong. They're saying it's postponed. I don't know if I buy that. I feel like that's a bit of semantics because there's no event happening on April 18th, and that same card isn't happening whenever the fights
Yeah.
resume. So to me, that's a cancellation. Now you could reschedule something, but they're being very careful with their words because of the fact that they have payments and things of that nature, and they have fighters. Also, speaking of being careful with words, saying that all the fighters are going to get paid what's on their contract is all well and good. That's what he said. But if I sign with the UFC for 6 fights, usually how it goes is I signed for 6 fights and I'm contracted to 6 fights, but there's no term attached to those fights. So if it takes me 10 years to get through those fights, it takes me 10 years. If it takes me 10 months to get through them, it takes me 10 months. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're being paid like other employees are during this time. They only get paid when they fight. And so sometimes you have to read between the lines a little bit as well.
No, it's interesting. I have my husband's an attorney, and we've been talking about this need, this desperation to put on these fights because they have the contract, and they want, they've got bills to pay. Uh, was this all just a way so that possibly Dana could say, I've done everything. I'm going to make this island, but it's really just a way to kind of go all out so that he is showing that he's doing this. And
Yeah.
possibly, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think there is definitely some of that as well. And look, I think it's important to say, I hope I'm not, being a negative Nancy here and pardon the,
Oh,
the line.
okay.
Have you been called that before? Have you been
Oh,
called a
yeah.
negative Nancy? Okay. A Debbie Downer, if you will. I hope
Yeah.
I'm not being that person. But it's just honestly, I'm an emotional guy, and I care deeply about the sport, and sometimes I get very passionate about it and things of that nature. So it was hard to see what was going on this
Mhm.
week. But yes, I think there was some of that, and I think it's important to note that the fighters all wanted to fight, and not only were the ones who were scheduled to fight wanted to fight, the ones who weren't scheduled were hitting me up saying like, how do I get on this card? Is it true about this? Is it true about that? Now part of that is because they don't get paid if they don't fight. But as Israel Adesanya told me earlier this week, like, don't look to us for health and safety, guidance. We're not those people. We're the ones who have devoted our lives to beating each other up. And if you know anything about fighters, probably not the most hygienic human beings on the planet. And so they sometimes like the idea of the world watching and them defying the rules. And, there's madness and chaos around, but they're going to be the ones who are able to figure this all out. So, I'm not surprised by the fact that they wanted to fight, and I think it's important to note that they weren't being forced to do this. But in the end, I think it was getting to be a little reckless.
Understood. Okay, Ariel, if I gave you the UFC and said, what is your plan to safely bring it back on board? What would you do?
I would be very cautious. I would read the tea leaves. I would look at what other people are doing. I understand even before that conference call with President Trump last Saturday, where he had all these commissioners and important people on the line from the world of sport, I understand some of the other commissioners have been talking to each other as well. And I would listen to them because the last thing you want is to be first. It's kind of like journalism, right? You don't want to be first and wrong. I'd rather be last and right. And so the last thing you want is to be first, but then God forbid someone gets really sick. God forbid someone dies. God forbid you have a tragedy. Imagine the stain on your legacy. I mean, I wouldn't be able to live with that. And so in this case, being first isn't important. It's about being smart. It's about being right. It's about being safe and healthy. And so if it means 6 months without the UFC or the NBA, I love the NBA dearly. So be it. But we all want this to end. And this mindset that we have to like rush back to normalcy is not the right mindset. The mindset that we should be having now, in my opinion, as far as the world of MMA is concerned, is let's just take our time, let's reset, let's be with our families, let's listen to the smart people here, let's listen to the grown-ups, and when the time is right, we'll be cautious. And so when the time is right, I would even suggest, like, they have the Apex, right? They have this arena in Las Vegas. Start putting on shows there. slowly but surely. To think that one day it's all going to magically go away and you'll be able to sell tickets to T-Mobile Arena or Madison Square Garden and 18,000 people are going to show up, it's not going to happen. So slowly but surely, if you're able to ease your way into it, still give people entertainment, great. But don't just be like, we're back, because guess what? Now you're being very selfish, you're being very reckless, and that's how this horrible virus is not going to go away. So I would err on the side of caution.
Yeah. Well, before we move on, because we have other topics we would like to cover about sports journalism and how you got started. I guess I have a quick question. So one of the big news breaks this week was on Monday, I think, when Ariel Helwani, the parody Twitter account, was retweeted by, or did Dana White retweet it with a comment?
He replied to the
You
comment, yeah, but it
replied.
had like 20,000 likes or something,
Yeah.
something crazy like that.
So what is it like? And he was Dana White, because the troll had said that Khabib was going to come back from Russia and make it to 249, and Dana White said, no, that's not true, but the card's happening on the West Coast, full card tomorrow. What is it like to learn information that's breaking from a parody of your own account?
Well, it's happened before. There's definitely been a few of those over the years. You want to know something crazy that just happened like 20 minutes ago? Supposedly, the Ariel Helvani guy, the fake account, texted me. I don't know how he got my number and asked me if I wanted to do an IG live with him. I'm like, what? I was like, buddy, I give you enough, love this week. DC and I talking about you. I'm not doing no IG live with you unless you tell me who you really are. But I'm not mad at the guy. It was a funny thing. I mean, the tweet itself was ridiculous that Vladimir Putin was going to fly him over and all this stuff. And I
Yeah.
can't believe so many people fell for it. And by the way, I'm a little surprised that Dana fell for it because he has me blocked on all forms of social media. So
Yeah.
me showing up on his feed should have led him to believe that something was amiss. Also, there was no blue check mark and all that stuff, but perhaps because it spread so much, it just seemed very believable. Um, I don't get worked up about that stuff. It's a little annoying when like people like sometimes they'll have fake people write things, trying to needle fighters or managers, and they'll send me a screen grab like, "How dare you?" I'm like, "You idiot! Look at the name. Look at there's no blue check mark. Come on, don't get all worked up towards me." So sometimes that gets a little funky, but I like to take it as a compliment. If someone, I feel like only the top level guys like Woj and Schefter, those guys have parody accounts, so I'll take it as a compliment.
Yeah. Well, especially when your co-host, Daniel Cormier, he got duped by it.
Yeah,
That,
24 hours. And I said to him, "You have my number. You could have just asked me. Like, you waited." I honestly, thank God he waited on the air because we got that great moment.
that
But I
was,
couldn't believe that he fell for it.
if you guys want to laugh, watch the video of DC telling Ariel you're a gangster because you got this, you said this and got, because I think he might have replied back to Dana. But
Yeah.
yes, watch it. So I invite anyone who have any other questions about, sports and COVID, the future of UFC, please join in now, because I know we have other questions for Mr. Hawani.
I have a question. Um,
This is Ria from
yes.
Phoenix, Arizona.
Hello, Ria.
Hi. So, obviously we've been talking about how like the fighters, like in order to get paid, they have to fight. Like right now we're in a situation where we have no idea when we're going to be out of quarantine. Do you think like Dana White or the UFC in general is going to do anything to help these fighters out? Like once we get to like a certain point where like people need to start sustaining themselves, or do you think like like with like because like I hadn't really like gotten into like the UFC or fighting until this year, so I don't really know much about the nature of um like the organization. Do you think like they will start supporting their fighters, or do you think that like they will leave their fighters to kind of be?
So that's a really good question. It was interesting when the NBA shut down and NHL, etc. The major league organizations here in the United States and Canada. A lot of the talk was about the arena workers and the team employees who would be losing out because there were no games, but wasn't all that much talk about the athletes because the athletes get paid regardless. Well, the fighters don't get paid, right? The fighters only get paid when they fight. So, and to be honest, a lot of them don't make a lot of money to begin with. A lot of them have part-time jobs, whether it's being a trainer, a coach, a fireman, a police officer, whatever the case may be. And so, a lot of these guys are nervous right now. A lot of these women are nervous as well. They're struggling. They a lot of them had training camps where they had got all the way to the end and they have to pay their coaches and their nutritionists, whatever the case is, and now they have no payoff, right? They have no purse. And so there was an event scheduled for March 21st in London, and that was the first one that was canceled. And my understanding is that everyone got something. Now they didn't get their full purse. The highest they went up was 20,000. Now the top level guys aren't making anywhere near 20,000, but the highest they went up in terms of paying people who went through this trouble of going through a whole training camp. Some of them even flew to London from America, was 20,000. A lot of them got 10,000. They got half of their purse, et cetera, et cetera. Then there was an event on March 28th that got canceled, April 11th, and now the April 18th show. March 28th and April 11th, to the best of my knowledge, have not been paid a thing. And that's a tough pill to swallow because they went up all the way till like around March 16th when they started to cancel these events. Now, April 18th just got canceled yesterday. I've been talking to a lot of the managers. As of right now, all the UFC is telling them is, we'll take care of you. What does that mean? Is that something that, makes them sleep well at night? It wouldn't for me, to be honest. But they're saying we'll take care of you. So I'm going to stay on this and see what that ultimately means. But no, this is not going to be one of those cases. At least as of right now, they are not telling any of the fighters, we're going to give you a stipend, we're going to give you a salary, we're going to help you out during this time. None of that is being discussed. And there is a case to be made. Hey, you were willing to take over this casino for 2+ months. You were willing to buy an island or put on some event on some private island. Now you can't. Well, how about taking some of that money and giving the fighters $1,000 every 2 weeks, $500, something? Because to be honest, a lot of these men and women who we love and watch and look forward to, enjoying their fights, they're struggling right now. They're not making a lot of money, as are a lot of people. I'm not trying to make them out to be, different than teachers and garbage men, etc. But they are struggling, and we sometimes view them as supreme athletes and superstars and all this stuff, and they're really not. And so I hope the UFC makes it right. But as of right now, all I'm hearing is we'll take care of you, but there hasn't really been any sort of definition as to what we'll take care of you means.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else? Thank you, Riyad. Does anyone else want to chime in on this? Ariel, player or fighter unionization. Is this something that could happen now?
I was talking to someone about this yesterday, and I said, if not now, when? And only, I mean, I have long believed that this was something that needed to happen. For those that don't know, there is no UFC fighter association. There is no MMA fighter association. There's really nothing like that, and they don't have a seat at the table. And it's not just about things like this. It's about the TV revenue. In the in the NBA, the players make 50% of the TV revenue. And that's why, a couple of years ago, the Golden State Warriors were able to sign Kevin Durant because the TV deal kicked in and the salary cap went up, and they stand to gain from that. Well, when the UFC signs TV deals, the fighters make 0%. And it's not just about the TV revenue. It's about the Reebok uniform deal. It's about the drug testing. I'm in favor of drug testing, but I'm also in favor of the fighters having a say. I'm also in favor of the fighters being able to negotiate, collectively bargain the terms, right? That's how it's done in baseball and basketball, pretty much every major sport. And so even now, when it comes to coming back, that's going to be collectively bargained, right? The NBA and the NHL and Major League Baseball aren't just going to say like, guys, on April 25th, we're back. No, they're going to sit down with the union. They're going to sit down with the owners, and they're all going to come to a decision. There's none of that here. And so the fighters don't have a say. They don't have a seat at the table. And so I've long believed that they should. And it's not because I'm anti-UFC. It's because I want to see the fighters treated the right way, and I want to see them have protection. I want to see them have something when they're done fighting and not just kicked to the curb. So I have long believed that it's something that should happen. Unfortunately, there was like a bit of a spike a couple of years ago, and then nothing happened, and it kind of died off, and I kind of gave up at that point. I kind of said, like, if the fighters can't see it now, I don't know if they'll ever see it in my lifetime. Maybe this opens their eyes. The problem is a lot of them are just a little afraid to speak out, and you need the top dogs to speak out on behalf of them. There's almost like 3 tiers of fighters. There's the ones who are coming in and they're taking 10 and 10. They're taking 10,000 to show and 10,000 to win. And they're just happy to be there. So they're definitely not ruffling feathers. And then there's the other tier who are on the cusp of fighting for a belt, number one contender, etc. And they're like, oh, this is not the time to rock the boat. And then you have the 1% at the very, very top, and you know who those fighters are. And a lot of them are like, hey, I made it. You know, you guys had to struggle the same way I have to struggle, or I had to struggle the same way you guys have to struggle. And so I wish that at some point someone would be like, hey, for the greater good, the future of the sport and its athletes, I'm going to step up. Right now, that hasn't happened. But I was just talking to someone about this now. Like, I wonder if this is going to be, you know, the trigger to allow this to happen. I'm not holding my breath because of what has happened in the past, but, you know, maybe I'll be proven wrong.
Maybe. We had Angela Hill visit our class, and she said that, you know, she hoped that you'd have like a Conor McGregor, or it has to be one of those people who will take the chance. And she said she hopes she'll be that person down the line.
Oh, that'd be nice. I'm
Yeah,
just closing my door here, so I'm taking
no
it with me
problem.
because my dog is.
She
I'm
also
still here.
mentioned how, and this is something that, you know, with Dana White saying that he's going to take care of everybody. She says that you get these secret bonuses. And so
Hmm.
it's almost like you don't want to upset the boss because you don't want to not, you know, not get that secret bonus. So it's interesting how that prevents this organization as well.
Oh yeah, this was a great thing that the old regime did. So the old regime, when I refer to them as such, I'm talking about Lorenzo Fertitta and Frank Fertitta, the Fertitta brothers who owned the Station Casinos, who were Dana White's partners. They sold the company. Dana White stayed on, and you know the rest. But they used to show up. They were infamous for this, showing up in the locker room after a big fight and handing over a check for $1 million. Now, $1 million to some of these fighters, that is life-changing money. That is money that they could never have dreamed of. But for the Fertittas and the amount of money that they were making, that's honestly like that's pocket change, right? But that's how they were able to keep them from rising up, because they would give you these checks, and then if you spoke out, you didn't get the checks anymore. And so the fighters are like, I understand. I sympathize with the position. Here I am, a father of 2, let's say. I just fought. I just beat someone, and I'm the champion now. They hand me a check for $1 million. Holy smoke! These guys are going to take care of me forever. And that wasn't the case. You know, the checks stopped coming at some point, depending on your status in the sport. And so it was a brilliant move on their part to do that, because you're able to keep everyone in line by doing that, because you're always hoping for the next check to come up. So very smart, very shrewd. But, you know, I'd love to see the sport being run like the other sports, where checks aren't being handed out in unmarked envelopes.
Yes, exactly. Well, before we move into some other questions, I think one of the last things is, and I don't know because of the timeline, what would you schedule next? I'm asking you to now be the matchmaker for UFC. Would you try and go for Khabib Tony, which I know we have Ramadan, so that would have to be in the fall if things get
Right.
back. Or would you have Tony Gaethje, Justin Gaethje, or would you have Gaethje versus Conor McGregor?
No, if in fact you're able to wait till the fall, I would do obviously Tony Khabib, because it's such a big fight. And now every time it gets canceled, it feels like it gets bigger. Um, and it seems like it's something that has to happen. And the plan was to do Conor versus Gaethje on July 11th. We'll see, you know, what becomes of that. And so I would keep that. I thought that was perfect, because if Conor beats Gaethje, there's no denying that he's the number one contender. And if Gaethje wins, he's the number one contender. And then you give the people the title fight that they want. So they had it right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this happened and screwed it all up.
You know what? I've tried to go to Tony Khabib 3 times. The first one was my 40th birthday present. That was
209.
Yes, and then as I was picking my husband up in DC to go to the airport, Khabib was in the hospital. Then we tried for Brooklyn again, and you know where that all happened. And so this was going to be it. This was Brooklyn. We were going to make it right. You know, so but you know, so will I buy a ticket again? Probably. I don't know. It's only postponed, so I probably still have a ticket. Who knows how it goes?
I wonder how that works. Yeah, that's where it gets a little funky. By the way, did you get on the flight to go to 209 even though he was in the hospital?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We got
Well
on the flight, you know. They had Woodley
Wonder Boy.
Wonder Boy, yes. So, you know, hey, it's Vegas. You know,
Yeah,
I made it work, but you know, that's what happens. That's a fight game. That's why I was telling my students that what when they kind of put UFC 249 back on, I was like, I'm nervous already on a normal
yeah.
with weight cuts, with you know, just all kinds of things going on. How is this one going to happen when you don't even have a location? So, you know, I'll still be nervous, but we'll see. Uh, so, okay, Megan, you had a question.
Okay, so you've covered so many fights, but what has been your favorite to cover and why?
Oh my, that is a really tough question. You know, it's crazy. It's crazy that we're doing this today because today is the 10-year anniversary of UFC 112 um, in Abu Dhabi, and that was one of the most memorable events that I've ever covered because it was in the desert in Abu Dhabi, and I was one of 3 North American journalists who traveled to go cover that event. And if you may recall, I don't know if any of you watched UFC 112 back then 10 years ago, but it was a very bizarre event because it was happening outdoors, first outdoor event. There were a bunch of like sheiks and government officials sitting in the front, and the government of Abu Dhabi had just purchased the UFC for 10%, so they really wanted to put on a big show.
Mm.
And Anderson Silva, the middleweight champion at the time, fought in the main event against a guy named Damian Maia, and he acted very bizarre in the main event, and just did not show up. It was not a good fight. It was very disappointing. In the middle of the fight, Dana White went up to his manager, Ed Soares, gave him the middleweight title and said, "You put this on him. I'm not doing it." And so I'll never forget, I went to the post-fight press conference afterwards. At the time, I had around 3,800 Twitter followers. And I remember at the end of the night, I ended up with like 7,000. I almost doubled them because the post-fight press conference was happening in a tent in the desert, and they were not streaming it, so there was no way of watching it. So I decided that I was going to live tweet it, and so everyone was just following along with my tweets, and Dana White was livid. He was so mad. It was very tense. It was very anxious, and I'm just live tweeting away. So everyone is starting to follow me, and all of a sudden my Twitter is blowing up, which was very exciting. And then afterwards, I was the only of those 3 North American journalists. I was the only one to have a camera there. I had a cameraman with me named Casey, who I worked with for 10 years. And we interviewed Dana White, and he was so mad. I remember him saying, "I have a pain right here in the middle of my head that I can't get rid of, and Anderson's waiting for me in a trailer." And that I did that interview. We posted it on YouTube. I woke up the next morning and it had over 1 million views. It was the first time I had any video that had over 1 million views. It was very exciting. It felt like a turning point in my life. So it's kind of wild that we're talking exactly 10 years to the date of that event. And by the way, I just posted that interview with Dana on my Instagram. If you want to go check it out, you can go check it out. So that one comes to mind. Getting to cover UFC 144 in Japan was very special in Saitama, the Saitama Super Arena. Getting to cover all the events in Montreal, my hometown, UFC 124, George St. Pierre against Josh Koscheck 2 was amazing. Over 20,000 people. UFC 129 was amazing. 55,000 people in Toronto. That was really exciting for me as well. And as circus-like as it was, and as funky as it all was, Mayweather McGregor was really a lot of fun because it was the first time that it felt like the world was watching my stuff. Like it was the biggest sports story on the planet, and I was particularly proud of the coverage that we did that week for MMAfighting.com. And so those are a few that come to mind. I don't know if I have one, but it has been a lot of fun, and I hope I get to do it for many, many years.
Wow. Um, I remember that fight and the coverage. So I think that my students, a lot of them were 8 years old.
Oh my gosh. That is wild. That was the
I
craziest event ever. You should go back and watch it
go
because
back
it
and
was very
watch it.
memorable. Frankie Edgar beat BJ Penn to become the lightweight champion. Renzo Gracie fought Matt Hughes, but it was just so amazing to be outside in Abu Dhabi. And I'll be honest, I'm Jewish, so I was a little nervous about going there. There were rumors, could I be allowed in? All these things were going on. And I was like, I'm going to go. This is going to be great. I couldn't have felt safer. It was fine. There were no issues whatsoever. And it was just a really memorable experience because I'd never covered an event in the middle of the desert like that. And it was just, and then it ends up like this. And Dana White's freaking out, and he's kind enough, Dana and I don't have the best relationship now. That's well documented, but back then he was always very gracious with his time. So it's amazing that here we are 10 years later talking about
Yeah.
it.
In a virtual classroom
Yeah.
after one of the strangest weeks. I mean, there's a lot of strange things that happen in UFC,
Yeah.
but I think this was one of the strangest weeks that you can say. But to your point about watching old fights, to my students, this is a great thing. I have you guys read essay by Joyce Carol Oates, and it's on boxing. And part of what she says is how watching a fight, she even enjoys more after, because a fight, it's still, you still enjoy it in present tense, and you can see things. You see the strategy. You see what the what the corners might have been providing, and it's different than like watching a baseball game, except when the Nats win the series.
Oh,
Sorry, Ariel.
oh
I
gosh.
know. I could watch that over and over again. But they were the Expos, so in a way, we're continuing.
No, we're not. There's the Expos died in 2004. The Nationals have nothing to do with us. You know what I have right here, Professor? I have a ticket to the first ever Expos game. You people were dancing on our graves. You were celebrating while I was miserable. So there's very few things I dislike on this planet. The Washington Nationals are one of them.
Oh,
Yes, I
you
said it.
know, it's just you're jealous. It's okay.
That's fine.
We were the team. We were one of the best comebacks. If you want to talk about narratives in sports, what is
What a great story. Yes, it
yeah,
was amazing. Yeah, I loved it.
I did too. Now I believe you. You're not being sarcastic. I have so many other things. Class, our time is coming. Please shout out if you want a question. I also have some friends of Writing and Fighting who other like alums, such as Charles. If you have a question, would you like to go ahead? Charles is an alum of
Oh,
University.
what's up, Charles?
Ariel, how you doing? Sorry about that. I was muted.
No problem.
You know, honestly, I think that with the sport going forward, at any point, I know we talked about it a little bit how when the sport does come back and it returns, we'll probably see a lot more events out of the Apex. They'll be crowdless. Does this affect the TV deal at all with ESPN? And if so, or if not, how long until we get to see those live audiences packing out arenas and you get to see those big gates again?
Well, the UFC is contracted to put on 42 events a year. So that's why Dana is saying, we'll meet all our requirements. He's talking about maybe putting on like one fight a week. Like, could you imagine whenever normalcy resumes, it's going to be so great because everything's going to be happening at the same time. Like the Masters are going to happen in November and it's going to be while the NBA finals are happening in October. It's like everything that we know is going to be flip-flop, but it's going to be fun. Hopefully we get to that point and we're all safe and healthy, and it's going to be like sports heaven. And so maybe we'll have 7 straight days of UFC and Bellator, and our minds will just like be like overloaded with MMA action. But no, their plan as of right now is to hopefully get through all of this and then to put on 42 events in 2020. Is that going to happen? That remains to be seen because we just don't know when normalcy will resume. But they're very lucky that they have the Apex. So the Apex, for those that don't know, is this arena that they built in Las Vegas on their campus. And so for them, this is a godsend, much like the Performance Center for World Wrestling Entertainment, because they own it, they operate it. It's a nice facility. It's quaint. It's where they do the Dana White Contender Series shows, and they're able to just do all the events there. It's in Las Vegas. It's easy. So I suspect when they're able to be up and running, you're going to see a lot more events happening at the Apex. That's where they wanted to move Khabib and Ferguson to before Nevada said no more events. So I suspect that they'll pump those out there. Guessing when that will be, I mean, it would be a foolish exercise right now because I don't think anyone on this planet knows when that will be.
So then just to follow up on that, do you think that the diminished revenue from not having live events, not having that gate will make its way to the fighters or other area of the fights themselves?
Yeah, no, I for sure think that they're going to be impacted. And that's truly why they wanted to put on this event on April 18th, in particular a pay-per-view event, right? Like they skipped the 28th and the 11th, but the pay-per-view event was important to them because that's the one that people are paying to watch. So yeah, it is going to be impactful. And, he's saying all the right things. He's saying that the fighters are going to get paid what they're contracted to. He's saying that the employees are not going to be let go and all this stuff. But it's tough to make proclamations like that. Like none of us know, right? I mean, what if this lasts, God forbid, a year? What if this lasts 8 months? I'm trying to take a positive approach and hoping that we'll get through this, sooner rather than later. But for sure, the fighters are going to be struggling right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are going to try to take other jobs, whatever jobs they could find, whether it's being, I don't know, an Uber driver, working at a grocery store, because when they're not fighting, they're not getting paid. And if they can't go to the gym and train people, they're not getting paid. This is all they know. And so I really feel for them during this time. And I suspect if it goes on long, they will be severely impacted.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
And Charles, I know that Syracuse is the where all the great sports reporters come out of. It's the journalism hub. However, so Charles is a color commentator for Cowboy Fight Series, which
Ooh.
Cowboy Cerrone's amateur MMA promotion that's here in DC.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's what Charles does. He's also worked he's worked for Combate and Cavezilla, and he has his own gym as well. But American, we have another commentator, Mo Rogan, who I think, you know him, right?
He's here?
He is at American. He graduated.
Oh, but is he in this chat right now?
You know what? I could text him right now to join.
Oh, it's okay. Well, actually,
yeah.
because it's crazy, because I met him at UFC 112 10 years ago.
Yes, isn't that crazy? He went to American.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
And so American now has 2 color commentators. So, I think that we might, Syracuse, I know you're ahead of us, but we are going to be the writing and fighting, and, all kinds of sports media is going to come from American. And we're going to
like it.
Syracuse.
I like it. You mentioned Syracuse. Do you want me to tell you guys about like when I started and how Syracuse kind of played a role in all this?
Please.
So I always loved I always loved sports broadcasting. I would watch games as a kid. I was enthralled by sports. I was mesmerized by it all, and I loved watching the broadcast, but not so much. I mean, obviously, I looked up to the athletes and I wanted to emulate them, but I really did love the broadcasters. I would pretend to be the broadcasters. I would try to copy their style. When I would play basketball on my driveway with my friends and my brothers, I would pretend to do post-game interviews and things of that nature. And I always loved just like the glitz and glamour of it all, and the television, the magic and all that stuff. I love traditional sports, but I also love combat sports. So initially I loved pro wrestling, and I loved the characters and the build up. I also loved boxing, and would go to my friend's house to watch the big events and whatnot. And eventually I stumbled upon mixed martial arts. I remember watching UFC 1 on delay. My grandparents had one of these like illegal pay-per-view boxes, and they would replay it over and over again. And so I watched it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. It's kind of like pro wrestling. It's kind of like boxing, but it's just crazy. You got like a sumo wrestler and a kickboxer and all this stuff. But to be honest, back then, it was very hard to like actually follow MMA. No one was covering it. And, you never really knew when the events were showing up. There was no internet and all that stuff. So it was tough, but I always kept my eye on it and tried to, follow it as much as possible. And so I remember being in the 9th grade. I was in English class, and it was Mrs. Blitt Hansen's English class, and we were supposed to be reading a textbook of some kind. And inside the textbook, I had an issue of Sports Illustrated, and it happened to be an issue where they were talking about the best schools in America for X, Y, and Z. And I remember seeing a little blurb where it said that Syracuse University produced the best sports broadcasters. If you want to be a sports broadcaster, you go to Syracuse University, because the likes of Bob Costas and Marv Albert, 2 of my favorites, went there. So in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, Syracuse University, that's where I need to go. So I remember telling my parents, I want to go to Syracuse University, but I was still, a few years away from that. And in my community, that wasn't a thing that we did. Like you don't actually leave Montreal to go to school. It's not a thing that you do. You just kind of stay home. You go to either Concordia University or McGill University. But I had these grand aspirations. So in 2001, I go to Syracuse University. And I recognized very early on that there's a lot of kids there who are like me, who have the same dreams and aspirations that I did, that they all want to be sports broadcasters as well. And so I've never been one who likes to, follow others. I don't like to be a follower. I kind of like to march to the beat of my own drum and be a bit of an underdog. And so I remember in 2001 telling my parents, in 10 years, there's this sport called mixed martial arts. There's this organization called the UFC. And I feel like in 10 years, this sport is going to be mainstream. I feel like there's going to be, some executive in some office who knows nothing about this sport, but will recognize that it's a big deal now. And he'll say, all right, I know nothing about this. I'm too old to understand this, but who's the guy? Let's hire the guy. Who's the expert? And I said, I want to be that guy. I want to be the Howard Cosell of MMA. I want to be the definitive voice of this sport. And my parents, God bless them, always supported me. They didn't know what the hell I was talking about, but they said, yes, go for it. We support you. And so I started my own radio show at Syracuse. There were 3 stations. And am I going too long here?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
There were 3 stations, student stations at Syracuse. There was WAER, which is like, it was like the country club station. I really didn't like it. It was all like, it was just, everyone was all like hoity-toity, not my style. I stayed there for a semester and then I got out because it wasn't my style. And then there was another station called Z89, which was like a music station. I worked for them for a little bit too, but I wouldn't play the songs. I would talk about sports as opposed to playing the songs. So they got mad at me and they told me to, hit the road. And then there was one other station called WERW, which was in the student center. And it was literally like in a closet with like a Fisher Price, my first radio studio kit. It was so bootleg, you couldn't imagine. So bootleg that we had a phone in there and I couldn't make outgoing calls on this phone. So I would get my mom, who's an immigrant from Lebanon, or my 10-year-old sister at the time to call guests and pretend that they were my producer and then call me on the phone. And then I would do these interviews with these guests. And I would write to people like Bruce Buffer, like Dan Severn. I would write to people in the MMA community and send them emails on their website and ask them to come on my show. And a lot of them said yes, because a lot of people weren't hitting them up. And so I did that for 3 years and I was really enjoying it. But when I graduated, I got a job working at HBO Sports in their documentary department for a documentary on the 1985 NCAA championship basketball game between Georgetown and Villanova. And that was very exciting to me because Patrick Ewing, my favorite athlete growing up, was a part of that game. And I wanted to be a part of the making of that documentary. And so for the first couple of years post-graduation, I actually went down the path of TV production. But in 2007, I got a job working at Spike TV. And at the time, Spike TV was the home of the UFC. And this was very exciting to me because my love for MMA was growing. And I had some thoughts and dreams about being an MMA journalist, but I was going down production and production was working well. And so I said, all right, I'm going to go work for Spike TV and I'm going to, work in production. And I lasted 1 week there because I realized very early on that the UFC produces all their stuff. So there was nothing creative about this job. And that's really not what I like. And so after a week there, I went to the boss and I said to him, I'm sorry, I don't think this is going to work out. And obviously this is a very ballsy thing to do because, a week working for a company, you're going to quit. That's kind of crazy thing to do. So he said, this is the biggest mistake of your life. You're going to regret this. You're never going to live this down. It's very unprofessional. But I knew in my heart, I'm the kind of person, if I don't love what I'm doing, if I'm not passionate about it, I don't want to wake up every morning and do it. So they made me stick around for a month and a half until they found someone to replace me. And in that month and a half, I recognized that was the crossroads of my life. And so I decided to start my own website. And my goal was I was going to start in October of 2007, and I was going to give myself a deadline of April of 2008, April 1st of 2008. And my goal was every morning I was going to post an audio interview with a fighter because I really felt strongly about my interviewing skills. And I felt like I can show people that I could bring something different to the table because I felt like the sport wasn't being covered properly. And so I started to build this website, and then I started to reach out to fighters on MySpace because there was no Twitter and Instagram back then. MySpace was the social media site du jour. And I was writing to everyone from Tito Ortiz to Chuck Liddell to George St. Pierre, anyone that you could think of, I wrote to them. And slowly but surely, they started to reply to me. And so every morning at 8 a.m., I would post an audio interview with a fighter on the site. Before podcasts, like you couldn't really download them. You had to listen to them on the website. But that was essentially what it was. And so I did this from October of 2007 to April of 2008. And come March of 2008, I was starting to get nervous because people were starting to recognize my work, but nothing was really happening. I wasn't getting any jobs. And so I started to look back into TV production. I started to give up a little bit. And with 3 days left on my deadline, March 28th, 2008, my wife's birthday, coincidentally, my future wife's birthday, I got a call from a website saying that they were starting and that they'd seen my stuff and that they wanted to ask me if I would be willing to join them. And it was great. It was backed by a big, strong company, and it seemed legit. And we got to talking, and they said to me, how much do you want to get paid for this? Which was an interesting question because usually you're just offered. And I took the money I took the number that I was making at Spike TV and I doubled it just to see what they would say. to get a victory over that boss that told me that I made a mistake. And they said yes. And that's where the journey started for me. In April of 2008, I worked for MMA Rated. Unfortunately, 6 months later, they sold their website and they shut it down, even though we were doing really well. So I took a bit of a break and tried to get back in. I thought that I was gone for good. But luckily, in April of 2009, AOL hired me and Versus hired me. And then I went on to MMA Fighting and SB Nation and Fox Sports. And then, of course, now to ESPN. And that's kind of how it all started for me.
Wow. There's a lot there. And I think for students, like the advice you're giving, Ariel, is first of all, persistence, finding, not taking no, or, finding that third radio station and getting your sister and your mother and whoever to call. And then also trust your instincts. I think many of us think you have to take a job and, do it and only go down one lane because you're afraid of trying something new, or you're afraid of being, picking something that may not work. And this shows you that this is something. And I think with journalism, you have to be flexible too. How many jobs? I can't even count them. How many different organizations you work for? And
Yeah. It's been quite the ride. And at times it felt like I was going to fail or I was hitting roadblocks. And I've met many obstacles like we all have. And of course, the stuff that happened with me in the UFC several years ago, and you think that you've devoted your life to something and now it's just going to go all up in smoke. But, you know, persistence is a very good way of putting it. And, I just don't want to wake up when I'm 80 years old and say that, I didn't live a full life and that I let myself down. And so I will never let anyone tell me that I can't do something. And, you know, when when they banned me from covering UFC events in 2016, I was talking to Dana White in the back. He said something that changed my life that will stick with me forever. He said that Lorenzo, his partner, Lorenzo Fertitta, he said, Lorenzo Fertitta just put a bullet in your head. Your career is over. And I was not going to let anyone decide when my career was over. And so that just, gave me more motivation to prove that, my career will be over on my terms and we can all, be, the ones who decide that. Don't let it, even if you get fired, even it doesn't matter. It's all on you. And even in these circumstances, right? We're all playing with the same deck of cards right now. You're at home. Don't lick your wounds. I believe very strongly in that. Don't lick your wounds. Don't feel sorry for yourself. Everyone will get through this. But now's the time that the crafty ones, that the innovators, the ones who are working hard, now's the time that these people will rise to the occasion and life will change. But you'll see a lot of people come out of this doing great things, coming up with great ideas, great concepts. And so I would urge everyone to be persistent, to be fighters, and to not use this time to just sit at home and watch Netflix and old shows. To think about your future and how you're going to be innovative and how you're going to be different, because we're so lucky we live in this age with the internet and so many resources, social media, that you can really create. You don't have to go down the path of working for a local market, South Dakota market 167, and then move on to this market and that market. That those rules don't apply anymore. You could be a superstar. You just have to work hard. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you work hard and keep at it, great things will happen.
Great advice. Great advice. Also, look to mentors, look to people. Contact.
Absolutely.
You were contacting fighters and asking for interviews, and I'm sure you had a couple no's, but you're going to have some yeses and a lot.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
No, this is great advice. All of us have been disrupted. These students, this was their freshman year, a lot of them, or sophomore years, and they were told, go home. And now that only that, Ariel, they were told, go home and you're not allowed to leave your house and your parents can actually keep you there. So it's been trying. And I think we have some athletes in my class, and that's been hard because you have the social contract with your team, right? You kind of follow what your coach says and your peers, and now they're on their own. And this is something where you're right. Let's be fighters. That's the first question I asked you guys, right? In the beginning of the semester, what is a fighter? And it's, yes, combat sports kind of presents that. And I think that's one of the reasons I love it, is that it is the presentation of two people trying to use their body physically to punish or be punished. However, it's also someone who doesn't give up. It's also someone who's dedicated. It's someone who's courageous, brave. And, this is what this time is. We're throughout the globe here, actually. We have Gabby. Can you wave your hand? She's in South Africa where they're on a military lockdown. And we've got Atticus, wave your hand. You're from Oregon, and we have some Jersey, all over. And this has been so wonderful, Ariel, for you to come, and share this with us, and not only allowing us to be interactive in this discussion with you, to learn about journalism. I think what we do with this class too is that we use fighting as a vehicle to understand society. And, they're doing their papers on, they pick a fighter and then look at its significance on society.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. Because fighting has always been there. We go back to the Greeks, and we read that, and we continue on. We have someone who's doing Tyson Fury and mental health. We have Lala Ali and legacy and gender. We have Weili Zhang and MMA in China. So what I'm saying too is that this moment in sports is also going to be something that I'm looking forward to getting through this, obviously. But how sports reacted and what happened is going to be so interesting in the future.
Oh yeah, like I said, everything's going to happen together, and of course the rules may change. But I would just, I would just hope that we do this the right way, because what was happening this week was not the right way. We should not be above. No one should be above this. Like the idea of taking up medical resources to help fighters who are essentially self-inflicting themselves, right? Like they're going to a fight knowing they may get hurt when people are dying, just did not seem like a smart thing. So it will be great. The fights will come back eventually.
Yes.
Life will go on. We just have to have a little patience.
Patience. And watch old fights.
Yeah, there's a ton of them. I mean,
Yes.
gosh, watch UFC 112 tonight.
Yeah.
Put it on something and relive it. 10 years ago today, I can't believe it. I feel very old right now, if I'm being honest.
I know. Yes, watch UFC 112 and watch your, it's on Instagram. They can watch your interview.
Yeah. So you can watch the fight and then go. I just posted it right before. I've been doing like a thing where I've been posting once or twice a week, like some old interviews. Thank God, they're mostly on YouTube these days. So it's been nice looking back.
Yeah.
Last night I posted one with Chael and I from 2010. So it's been a really great ride. Been great memories, and that was a bit of a simpler time.
Yeah.
But I like to, sometimes not to like puff my chest out, but just to, I know there's a lot of new fans to maybe educate them on, what happened 10 or so years ago.
Got it. Back in MySpace era, and now you're kind of pioneering the Instagram Live. You started doing that.
I'd like to think I started it first, and they all copied me. And you know what? As I said earlier, now I kind of don't want to do it anymore. I'm like thinking about the next thing because I see all these copycats. I look at my Instagram and there's like 48 Instagram lives. I'm over this. I need to find something better. I need to find something different. So I don't want to be a follower.
Well, how about visiting a virtual classroom?
This was great. Honestly, this was one of the highlights. I was supposed to be on Tuesday, but I guess I got bumped. And so here I am on Friday. I hold grudges. I want you guys to know. I remember these things. I remember everything.
I know you're cracking it up.
No, I love talking to students because I was in your shoes one day, not that long ago. And I remember when journalists used to come to Syracuse and talk to us, I was the first one there. I love, listening and being inspired and looking up to people. And I think it's great what you guys are doing because this is something that I'm so passionate about. So anytime anyone asks me to do something like this, whether it's in person or via some sort of technology, I love doing it. I really do. So it is my honor. I was looking forward to it.
Thank you. And maybe someday you'll come and teach a class in person.
Oh, that'd be nice. I feel like it would be way less stressful than my current job.
What, teaching? I would think so. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you guys do? You don't stress me out. Do I stress you out though? Maybe. So you love me, Professor.
Yeah.
Yes. Ariel, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been so informative again. So we will keep in touch. We're going to be watching you and seeing how everything plays out. But we learned a lot, and thank you for all the knowledge, information, experience, wisdom. And I hope you and your family stays well.
Thank you. And I wish the same to you and everyone here. And I really appreciate this. Honestly, it's an honor for me that anyone would want to even listen to me. So thank you. And, feel free to reach out. And if anyone has any further questions, and I'd love to come back and maybe one day in person, we could do this when life resumes and
Yeah.
we could be around other people.